Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Herr, Jesu Christ, war Mensch und Gott, which translates to Lord Jesus Christ, true man and God. This is a particularly interesting chorale. There's lots of harmonic quirks and turns and twists that are throughout, especially near the end. But really all throughout you're going to see a lot of accidentals, lots of chromatic harmony and expressivity throughout the chorale, sometimes not even really applying to the harmony itself, but more so just this interweaving of lines that sometimes disagree with one another in terms of, what key we're in at any given time. But we're going to start things off in the key of F major. We start on F, we end on C actually, interestingly enough, but one flat in the key signature sort of implies F major. And our first perfect authentic cadence is in the key of F major. So we're starting off with the one chord, F major, passing tone in the bass. We get A, C, A, and F. That's F major in first inversion, so we'll just change the figured bass to reflect that. We then have an interesting chord here. We have G, C, A, and F, and for all intents and purposes, it's kind of like a chordal harmony, or we have kind of like a cluster going on, and I hear this in a couple of different ways. The first way that I hear this is as a 6/4 chord, and I hear this G as like a lower suspension, almost like a 9/10 suspension under the alto, or a 7/8 suspension under the melody, but we have this G here, or sorry, not this G, this D here, that interrupts the full resolution of the chord. That's a non-chord tone for sure, but it would be a chord tone if this were, if this A and this F were both suspensions over the bass, and they were just anticipating the resolution down to C. So this F resolves down to E, this A resolves down to G. So this kind of feels like a suspended 5 chord as well. So if you analyze this like a 5 chord, I think you could hear it that way as well. But 1/6/4 going to 5 is already associated with that sound anyways. So we're going to go ahead and mark it as such. This is a 5 chord, C, E, G, and E with a passing 7th in the bass. So we have this 1/6/4 and 5 going on, which doesn't typically occur in the middle of the phrase, but it's interesting that it's happening here. We then have A, F, A, and C. That's F major in root position. That's a tonic triad. Passing tones in the inner voices. One of them's a passing 7th. And then we have B flat, D, F, and D. That's a root position at B flat major triad. That is 4. Passing 7th in the bass, passing tone in the tenor, before we get G, B flat, G, and E. That's E diminished in first inversion. It's interesting that we're not seeing a dominant chord here, but rather a leading tone chord, which functions as a dominant because of the leading tone in the chord. But 4/7/1, which is the cadence we have here, F, C, A, and F, is relatively uncommon as a perfect authentic cadence formula. More so, it is seen in imperfect authentic cadences, so that's interesting. Next phrase is a half cadence, or ends in a half cadence in the key of D minor, and I think there really isn't any reason for us to just straight away move to the key of D minor from this D minor chord here, D, D, A, and F. So we can call this 6 in the key of F major and 1 in the key of D minor, with a passing 7th in the tenor. We then have G, B flat, G, and E. That's E diminished over G. That's 2/6. And then we have some passing tones here. We have F, C, F, and E natural. That would be kind of like a passing 1/7 or 3/7 chord, which would take us to 6 actually. So I'm not going to analyze it, it's not super important. Actually, it is a complete 7th chord. We have F, A, C, and E. And we'd have some adjacent harmony going on. Maybe I will mark it like a 3, 6, 5. Might as well, because we have some adjacent harmony going on. We have, or not adjacent harmony, but 2 going to 6 doesn't make as much sense as 3 going to 6 as far as normative progressions are concerned. I mean, we see 2 go to 6 from time to time because it's a transitive progression. It goes from against the grain, right? We would expect 6 to go to 2, but if the voice leading could take 6 to 2, why couldn't 2 go to 6? And the answer is that there isn't a good reason to suggest why you couldn't go in the other direction. You can go in reverse. It just takes you towards the dominant via the 6 chord rather than the 2 chord. But 3 going to 6 is more normative. It's something that you would expect because the cycle of falling fifths is very principal to tonal music, especially music of the Baroque period. So B flat, D, F, and D. And the reason why it's so principal has to do with the use of sequences. I mean, sequences never really went out of style, but they were a hallmark of the Baroque period. We then have this anticipation here in the alto before we get E, E, G, and C. That's C major in first inversion, which would be a 7-6 chord, which some people might analyze as 5-6 of 3, but I don't think we're going to write that this time because it doesn't resolve to anything 3 related. We have passing F sharp, this D is an anticipation, this A is a non-chord tone, and if we look at all of the notes in that chord, that spells D7 over F sharp. That would be 5-6-5 of 4, because G minor is our 4 and D is our dominant of 4. So we're seeing it contextualized here as a secondary dominant rather than as a tonic chord, and that resolves where we would expect G minor, G, D, D, and B flat, which is our 4 chord. And this C sharp right here, along with this E, they're both bringing attention to the root and the third of the D minor triad that's going to be the byproduct of this chord progression. In fact, if we spell the full chord, C sharp, E, G, and B flat, that's a fully diminished 7th in second inversion, 4 going to 7. So we see a very pretty severe harmonic subdivision of the harmonic rhythm here. We see it subdivided on 3 of the 4 beats in the measure. There's lots of handwriting going on here. But we have 4 going to 7 going to 1, D, D, F, and A, which is a tonic triad in root position. Passing tone in the bass, it's a passing 7th more specifically, and this A is also well, it is a chord tone, unlike the C, which is not a chord tone for our intents and purposes. We then have B flat, E, and G, and where you could make the argument that this is a 2-6 chord, I think this E is an accented non-chord tone, or 2-6-4 rather. I think this E is a accented passing tone, and this is actually G minor in first inversion, B flat, D, and G, which would be 4-6. And if you've watched some videos of mine in the past, or if you know about different types of cadences, you know that 4-6 going to 5, which is A major is A, E, C sharp, and A, is a particular type of half cadence called a Phrygian half cadence because of the half step movement in the bass. And even though 2-6-4 achieves that same thing, it's articulating the same idea. 4-6, the fact that we can pull it apart from the notes that are present on this beat, just means that it's just something that pops up. And the fact that 4-6 chords are so common in these Phrygian half cadences, I feel like there's something to this. There's definitely like a pattern to it that Bach is repurposing time and time again. Looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of C major, and before we modulate, we do get a resolution of 5 going to 1, D minor, D, F, D, and A, which is our tonic triad in root position. And I think we modulate from here. C major, in the key of C major, this is our 2 chord. And interestingly enough, we have 2 going directly to 1, C major. You could make the argument that this is actually an E minor chord, or E minor 7, E, G, D, and G, an incomplete E minor 7, but if you're literally looking at the downbeat of the harmonic rhythm, you could make that argument, but I think this D is a 7-6 suspension over the bass, and this is actually C major in root. first inversion, so 1-6. So 2 doesn't often go to 1, at least the way that I analyze, so the fact that we're seeing it here without any passing tones or counterpoint going on between the two chords is interesting. Well, there is a little bit of counterpoint, there is a suspension going on in the alto, but the fact that we're not seeing 2 with any passing tones or non-chord tones in it is really unusual. We don't see 2 go to 1 all that often. We then have F, F, C, and A. That's F major in root position. That is a 4 chord in the key of C major. Passing tones in the outer voices before we get A, E, C, and C. That's A minor in root position. That is a 6 chord. This A is a non-chord tone. This this A is a chord tone. This F is a non-chord tone, so we will mark it. And then we get B natural, B, A, F, and D. And you could make the argument that this is a B half diminished chord, so 7-7, but I really do think this A is a 7-6 suspension over the bass, and this is actually G7 over B, which would be 5-6-5. This is also further strengthened by the fact that the chordal 7th resolves down by step, and the A does as well, but happens earlier, happens pretty much during the same beat, but they're more or less achieving the same thing. We then have C, G, F, and C. This F is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, but it's otherwise alluding to our tonic C major. We then go to G major in root position, G, G, D, and B natural. That's our 5 chord, and then we cadence on C major, C, G, E, and C, which is our tonic again. Okay, looking ahead, we have an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor. So we're looking for a point on which we modulate from C to A minor, or do we modulate from C to A minor? I think we actually go to A minor through F major, at least that's what it sounds like to me. We're going to go ahead and call this C major chord our 5 in the key of F, and we're going to go directly to F major, F, A, F, and C, which is our tonic in the key of F. And even though this modulation is short-lived, I think this section definitely sounds like it's in the key of F major, and it stays consistent with the fact that the chorale has been mostly in the world of 1 flat for a while now. So that 1 chord takes us to B flat major, B flat, F, and D, which is our 4 chord in root position. We then have A, B flat, and E. This A is an accented passing tone in the bass. It's this G that's our chord tone, and that would make this an E diminished over G chord. That's 7-6. And that takes us exactly where we would expect, back to 1, F major, A, C, F, A, and F, which is our tonic triad, F major, in first inversion. And before we get this B natural, I think we modulate to the key of A minor. This F major chord is now 6-6. It is our submediant. Okay, now we get some subdivision of the harmonic rhythm. I tried to say too many words at once there, as I often find myself doing. But we have some passing tones in the lower voices, and we have an anticipation in the alto. But if we spell those notes, we get B flat, D, G, and F. That is G7 over B, which would be subtonic 7th 6-5, or 5-6-5 of 3, and those should both be in parentheses because they're happening on the offbeats, and I'll put 2 parentheses around this one because there is a double analysis for it depending on how you look at it. You could look at this as 5-6-5 of 3 or 7-6-5, depending on how you feel the 7 chord should function. If you feel like the 7 chord is pretty much always a leading tone chord in minor keys, then 5-6-5 of 3 is often an accurate analysis, but it isn't always, so I feel like 7 is a better analysis in most cases, because 7 still wants to go to 3 via the cycle of falling fifths, so it doesn't really matter. But it does resolve to 3 in this case, C, E, G, and E, which is our 3 chord in root position. We then get some adjacent harmony, which is a likely place for 3 to go. We get C, A, F sharp, and D. This is a harmonization of melodic minor. We have F sharp, G sharp, and A. This is D7 over C, which would be 5-4-2, relatively uncommon voicing for a 4 chord, as is a 7 chord in a 4-7 chord in third inversion. Passing tone in the bass, passing tone in the tenor. This A and this C, those are both chord tones before we get B flat, oh sorry, no, B natural. The B natural carries over. B natural, D, G sharp, and D. Now you could make the argument that this is a 7/6 chord. That's totally fair. But I think when we lump together everything here in this context, we have E, E, G sharp, and D. We have the B as well, another D. I really think that 5/7 is being implied here. But 5/7 and 4 wants to go to 5, 4 wants to go to 7. However you analyze it doesn't, I don't think, particularly matter. I'm just looking at this as an entire gesture, and the fact that we have B going down to E, I look at this entire beat as one harmonic unit that you could extrapolate the notes from the entirety of the beat and use them to contribute to the whole chord in this case. Regardless, we do cadence on A minor with the C in the melody, which is our tonic triad, A, E, A, and C. Okay, looking ahead, we have a half cadence in the key of F major, so we're looking for a point on which we modulate, and I don't think we modulate on the first beat like we have been doing in a lot of these phrases, if not on the first beat on the cadence before the phrase even starts. We have A, E, A, and C. That's A minor again, just revoiced with the bass an octave below. And then we go to D minor, D, F, A, and, oh, I'm so sorry, not D minor. We are going to modulate over this A. Apologies, we're going to go to the key of F via this 3 chord. A minor is now our 3 chord. We have D, F, A, and B flat. That's the thing that's telling to me about whether or not we've modulated. I thought this was a B natural. Or I read this as a D actually because I was thinking we were in bass clef in the melody for some reason. No, this is a B flat. And B flat major 7 over D, that would be 4, 6, 5. We're seeing another 4/7 chord again. That's interesting. Then we have a couple of non-chord tones going on. This C is a non-chord tone. This G is an anticipation. This E is a passing tone. That spells C7 over E, which is 5, 6, 5. So it's interesting. We're seeing another 7 chord, some adjacent harmony here, which is 3, how 3 often manifests, right? 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5. Then we get F major, F, C, G, and A, but this G is an accented, or it's a 9/8 suspension over the bass. It's a tonic triad regardless. And we're going to stay in the key of F for the rest of the phrase. So then we have B flat, F, and D, which is our 4 chord in the key of B flat, sorry, not B flat major, in the key of F major. That's a likely place for one to go. We have a passing tone in the bass, and an E flat here as well, which is very interesting that we're getting E flat happening at the same time as this B flat triad. It creates a very crunchy sound, almost as if we're going to the key of B flat, but we're not. We're actually tonicizing G minor. We have D, F sharp, E flat, and C. What a crunchy chord. It's like a D7 flat 9. But I think what's actually happening here is this E flat's actually an accented non-chord tone, and it's really just bringing attention to this idea of G minor, this ideation of G minor going on here. But I think this is just a D7 chord, D, F sharp, D, and C. So D7, maybe you could put a flat 9 in there, who knows, depending on how you look at this particular chorale. But I feel like the E flat is more momentary than really the idea of the chord. The idea that the E flat happens briefly, where the D is the actual sonority. It's fleeting. But 4 going to 5 of apologies, that's not just 5/7 flat 9. That's 5/7 of 2 because G minor is our supertonic, and that takes us where we would think. G minor, G, G, D, and B flat. Now, interestingly, this is the thing I was talking about, 2 chords. Now, 2 chords don't typically go to 1 because the chord that we have on the next beat is a 1 chord, A, C, F, and A, which is a 1 chord in first inversion, but still a 1 chord regardless, with a passing tone in the bass. But this 2 chord right here, this is a very common configuration for the 2 chord, where we have a 2 chord on the downbeat or on the numbered beat, but it's often paired with the 6 of the chord getting linked to the tonic of the chord with the leading tone. And I'm inclined to believe that in most cases we have a 7 chord happening here rather than a 2 chord. So I typically see this analysis, or I don't typically see this analysis. This is how I typically analyze the chord progressions. It's actually a 7 chord in first inversion rather than a 2 chord. But this is not the first time we've seen 5-7 of 2 go to 2 that I often analyze as a 7 chord. But in this case, because we're tonicizing 2, 2 takes precedence here. And maybe this is 2 going to 7 going to 1. But I'm inclined to believe that 2-7-1 really is a... Actually, you know, if I analyze the progression in the past chorales as 2-7-1, they are quite common, but 2 and 7 are very similar chords to one another, and as far as dominants are concerned, 2 going to 7 doesn't really feel like the same predominant progression that 4 going to 7 does, because the progression feels fairly static. The only thing you're doing is you're swapping in the leading tone for the 6th of the 2 chord, and that just doesn't really feel like a justifiable chord progression to me. I'd rather just look at that 6th of the 2 chord as an accented non-chord tone and look at the passing leading tone as our chord tone. And the fact that it typically only happens with one of the voices rather than trying to turn it into a 7-7 chord, I think further justifies that opinion. But sometimes this is not the first time we've seen this. We've seen this a couple of times in the past, maybe 2 or 3 times in the past, where we get 5 of 2 and then we have 2 turning into a 7 chord. But I wanted to write 7-6 there because it's interesting that that's how that often manifests. Regardless, we have 1-6 going to 5, C, C, E, and G, which is our tonic, or sorry, no, not our tonic, our dominant, apologies. Yes, so now we are moving to the key of C. This last phrase has to be the most interesting phrase of the chorale. We get mode mixture, we get this idea of parallelism between C major and C minor, which is really fascinating. So we start off with C major, C, C, E, and G. The bass leaps up an octave, and I think this is where we modulate to the key of C. This is our tonic triad in root position. We then have F sharp, C, E flat, and A. Now we could look at this as a 6 fully diminished, or F sharp. F sharp would be in the key of, oh no, apologies. Oh my goodness, I'm confusing this with how I analyze this in my notes. This E flat is part of a 7-6 suspension in the bass. This is D7 over F sharp, which would be 5-6-5 of 5, because D is the dominant of G, and that resolves where we would expect to G major. F, G, D, and B, which is G7 over F, that would be 5-4-2, and it resolves somewhere that we would expect. We get E flat, G, E flat, and C, which is C minor rather than C major. So we're seeing a juxtaposition of C major and C minor happening at the same time. It's a really bizarre sound. This A flat is an accented non-chord tone as well. We have B natural, G, F, and D. Another 5-7 chord, but this time it's in first inversion, 5-6-5. We then have C, G, F, and C. This F is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, but we go to C minor again. It's really interesting that we're getting C minor here, especially after we Bach set the idea of C major right out the bat. So the mode mixture is really fascinating. We do not see this a lot in the chorales. I would imagine we would see this in other vocal music composed by Bach, because he treats the voice like any other non-vocal instrument. But in the chorales, where we're seeing a deliberate downbeat homorhythmic texture, it's not very common for us to see a mixture of major and minor in the same phrase. So this is very refreshing to see, because this is definitely not foreign to Bach. You look at other pieces by Bach and you see parallelism between major and minor all the time, but seeing it in the chorales is really interesting. Here we have G, G, D, and B natural. That's G major, which is in root position. It's our 5 chord, and then our perfect authentic cadence is C major, C, G, E, and C, where we get this kind of idea of the Picardy third, because the idea of minor is in our head before we get major again. It's a phrase that's sandwiched by major chords but minor throughout. And something not to skirt over is the fact that we started in the key of F and we cadenced in the key of C. So I don't really know what key this chorale is in. We have F, we have D, so we're already dominated by the idea of one flat in the key, which is what the key signature reflects. Then we get C major before going back to F. Then we get A minor. Then we get F. And then we get C major. So it's like a 70-30 split, or like a 60-40 split of flat in the key signature and no key signature. So there's this idea of representation between two keys. What key is the chorale in? Or would we say that this chorale is in the key of F, or would we say that this chorale is in the key of C? The fact that the majority of it is in the key of one flat is an argument for F or D minor, and the fact that we have our final cadence in the key of C is an argument for the fact that it's in the key of C major, no key signature. So it's really bizarre, it's really unusual. This isn't the first time we've seen a chorale end in the key that in a different key that it started with, but it happens. And this isn't the first time it's happened, but in this case it's particularly interesting because we brought so much attention to C minor in a C major section. Or maybe this is a C minor section and we also brought attention to C major. I really don't know. It's really up in the air at this point, but the melody makes me feel like it's C major or even A minor. The melody feels very much like A minor to me, but I rest my case, and I'm going to rest my voice by ending the video. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel by doing so. If you're interested in subscribing and hitting the notification icon, you'll be indicated, or you'll be updated about when I upload. I upload once a day, so if you want your daily fix of Bach or your daily fix of analysis in general, feel free to follow along on the journey. There are hundreds and hundreds of videos planned for the future. So I'm looking forward to having you along if you so choose to tag along. But on that note, again, thank you so much for watching the video and supporting the channel. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.